Today we're diving into the powerful story of Canon Collins scholar Melvin Dirkse, a Cape Town-born educator and PhD candidate tackling one of South Africa's most overlooked issues, teacher mental health.
I always had a desire to understand how the community of the Cape Flats, how teachers in that community, how they manage and navigate their way through the various community challenges that come with the job.
From classrooms to policy spaces, Melvin is driving change in communities affected by trauma and violence.
My study really wants to look at how do we unpack this, but how do we deal with it in a proactive way.
His mission? To equip teachers with real practical tools for resilience and leadership in some of the country's toughest schools.
Leaders now are dealing with different types of problems that we've never seen before. More teachers are stepping out of the profession. More teachers are taking early retirement. Younger teachers are leaving the professions after a year or two.
Stay tuned for an inspiring conversation about healing, hope, and education that transforms. It's great to have you here, Melvin. Let's kick off our conversation with a little background. What is your story?
I'm absolutely delighted to share some time with you. I look forward to our discussion today. I think we'll talk about some really relevant issues. But before we dive in, I'd like to just give you a little bit of a backstory as to who I am. I am from Cape Town. I'm a born and bred Cape Townian. I'll probably die here one day. I love the city, love the people, I love the country. I studied in Cape Town at the universities around here in the Western Cape. I did my undergraduate work in psychology and education. I completed that and then became a teacher. I was trained as a high school guidance counselor, but ended up teaching special needs learners, which was quite a refreshing experience for me. You know, I was geared to teach high school learners, and I ended up teaching primary school special needs learners. So I did that for 7.5, about 8 years, and I felt my career progression, I needed to move on. And I got a job at the Western Cape Provincial Legislature. I was the manager for public education, and that was really focused on educating the public on the lawmaking process, the legislative process. I did that for a few years, and then again I decided I need to advance myself. I wanted to do a PhD. It's been a long-term goal, and I applied for this scholarship, very rigorous selection process as well, and I was fortunate to become part of the team. And so, I'm really excited to be part of this wonderful community, wonderful network, and I look forward to a long-range relationship beyond, the completion of my degree.
Tell us about what your research is exploring and what do you hope to achieve through it?
Currently, I am doing my PhD in educational psychology at the University of the Western Cape. I always had a desire to understand how the community of the Cape Flats, how teachers in that community, how they manage and navigate their way through the various community challenges that come with the job. Okay. Now you'll recall that Mitchell's Plain in particular has a unique apartheid legacy. Many of the people who were displaced under the Group Areas Act were taken to the peripheral parts of Cape Town, Mitchell's Plain, Khayelitsha and so forth. And it is, I believe, even to this day, undocumented what psychological toll it took on these people to be misplaced in that very violent and traumatic way. I was speaking to a friend of mine a few months ago rather, and I was saying to her, my great-grandparents lived in Claremont, Harfield Village, and they were forcefully removed from their homes in Claremont, particularly Harfield Village. And for them, the pain never went away. The psychological harm never went away. And so I guess in some way, my family was directly impacted by the Group Areas Act. Ultimately, the community then developed certain habits and behaviors that really had a knock-on effect. We saw the development of gangsterism, drug use, substance abuse, a growing problem with gender-based violence, child killings, and those are realities on the Cape Flats. And so these social issues, psychosocial issues, then spill over into schools, and there's a profound impact in how teachers have to manage these difficulties. Okay, because remember, teachers are trained as teachers; they are not particularly trained to deal with psychosocial difficulties. And so my research will really focus on how does these school experiences impact their mental health. But I want to look at this from a teacher-centered perspective. What are teachers saying? What are their lived experience, as it were? And how are they managing and coping with overcrowded classrooms, indifferent parents, in fact, many absent parents, parents who just demonstrate no interest in the child's learning, no interest in the child's scholastic, psychological, or social development, but also difficulty with indifferent support from school management, which exacerbate that mental health difficulties. SMT is not really coming on board, and so teachers really feeling isolated. My study really want to look at how do we unpack this, but how do we deal with it in a proactive way. Many of the studies that were conducted look at the causes of teacher mental health, but they don't look at appropriate, bespoke intervention models or intervention programs for teacher mental health. So they provide theory, they provide knowledge, but they don't provide practical programs to mitigate many of these mental health difficulties teachers experience. There are studies being done on teacher mental health. There's a growing number of studies that's coming out on teacher mental health, but again, many of them focus on causes, not on intervention models, but many of them also focus on how to train teachers to deal with learner mental health. If the teacher who are dealing with their own mental health difficulties are not in a good space, how do you then have a sustainable program where teachers are able to provide support to children and yet struggling with their own mental health difficulties?
It sounds like teachers need an entire ecosystem of mutual support in place if they are going to be effective. And I guess that includes self-care. You're passionate about ethical and courageous leadership within education systems. Tell us a little bit about that.
So when we talk about ethical and courageous leadership in schools, there's an area we need work. That is certainly an area where work needs to be done. Now, schools on the Cape Flats always presented with difficulties, even before COVID-19, but in the past, the community always struggled with some type of socioeconomic or psychosocial difficulties. However, the landscape has evolved. Leaders now are dealing with different types of problems that we've never seen before. Social media has certainly played a role in that, and cyberbullying has certainly become a huge difficulty. There's a lot of research being done on that now, but because social media is now being used for shaming, it's used for character assassination. But my big concern, social media is leading to a greater degree of suicidal ideation and actual suicide, where learners are taking their own lives because of cyber attacks. They are threatened. In fact, there was a young girl in Neisner who was a victim of a brutal bullying attack, and the child was about to take her own life. And the parents had to intervene, the school had to intervene. So these are new problems for leaders in schools. These are new difficulties that they have to deal with. They also have to deal with, remember in the past, mental health was not spoken about as it is today. And so teachers carried all the difficulties that learners presented. They had to deal with all the stress that come with teaching, the administrative load, the discipline difficulties that they experience with learners, indifferent leadership. And so what I call the cumulative effect, we now see the cumulative effect of not addressing teacher mental health. It's been under wraps, as it were, all the years. And so the ripple effect of that is more and more teachers are taking long leave, extended leave. More teachers are stepping out of the profession. More teachers are taking early retirement. And for me, a very disturbing trend is younger teachers are leaving the professions after a year or two because they cannot cope with the challenges that come with the profession. And so in that environment, courageous leadership is very difficult, okay? Because principals themselves come from a history where they themselves were not trained to deal with these difficulties. And so how do you then mitigate the situation? Because we are living in a time of VUCA. Okay, VUCA is an acronym. We're living in a time of volatility. We're living in a time of uncertainty. We're living in a time of complexity, and we're living in a time of ambiguity. VUCA is, as it were, a wake-up call for us to do things differently if we are going to demonstrate courageous leadership. And so how do we turn this around? How do we respond to a VUCA situation? And volatility, how do we counter volatility? And that is by having vision. I'll speak in a bit about principals who demonstrated vision, but if the school or the leadership of the school and the principal in particular have a vision for the school, they are much better equipped then to deal with the volatility that comes with an ever-changing environment. Schools nowadays are going through a period of uncertainty. The U in VUCA. We currently have a situation in the Western Cape where 2,400 teachers could lose their jobs. So there's a period of uncertainty around this. You know, how do I manage my team? How will I manage my classrooms? How will I manage teacher expectations? How do I manage the fact that a teacher is living in anxiety because they might be out of a job come next quarter? Okay, so principals have all of these different balls that they're juggling at the same time. And so when a principal has understanding of the environment, this uncertain environment, when it develops a sense of understanding, it helps the leader, it helps the school, and in general, it helps the community go through a period of uncertainty much more meaningfully. The C in VUCA, complexity. Situations in schools nowadays are very complex. There are multiple difficulties that schools deal with. We spoke about that briefly. But when there's clarity from the leadership, okay, when I interview teachers and I speak about some of their challenges, they say to me the lack of clarity is one of the biggest stifling things that we have to deal with. You know, there's confusion, there's miscommunication from leadership, there's inconsistency, and particularly during a time of complexity, when there's clarity from leadership, it allays the fears of the team. Okay, so that is important. And then ambiguity. How do we deal with ambiguity? You know, there's just a plethora of different things coming at the leader, but the best way that the research tells us to deal with it is by being agile, being able to bounce back, being able to make decisive decisions quickly in a rapidly changing environment. When your team sees a man or a woman in leadership who's agile, who are able to quickly assess the situation and then come up with a meaningful intervention strategy, it boosts them in a tremendous way. So VUCA is very important for us to understand in an ever-changing world, and I believe leaders who do not embrace the idea that we are living in an ever-changing world will be left behind, and that if you are not able to embrace complexity and change in a meaningful way, you and your team will be left behind. So that is something that is extremely important. I want to talk a little bit about the knock-on effect of poor mental health in leaders, from principals to teachers and to students. but also I want to talk about where are the success stories. The Cape Flats comes with challenges and difficulties, and yet I've seen some stories that were awe-inspiring. Where leaders embraced the VUCA world, the complexity, the uncertainty, the vulnerability, and where they demonstrated agility. There are schools on the Cape Flats, and I mention this because this is the focus of my study. There are schools in the Cape Flats who live in low socioeconomic communities, but who demonstrated and has given us results that blows the mind. I'd like to mention 3 schools, if I may. West End Primary School, it's a school in Mitchell's Plain. It's a school in an environment where all of the social difficulties I mentioned earlier are clearly seen. But this school had a principal, and he had a vision for the school. He had very clear ideas where he wanted to take the school. And he was able to, through hard work, through commitment, able to take the school to a place the school has never been before. Okay, the school was a top 3 finalist in the T4 Education Network's World Best School in 2022. Okay, and the category that they were listed in was overcoming adversity. Now think about this. The school is situated in Lentegeur, Mitchell's Plain, where we have social difficulties, gangsterism, crime, drugs, children with indifferent, absent parents. And yet you have a leader who demonstrated that I'm going to take the school to a place we've never been before. And here the school had received world recognition for the work that they've done. They've gone beyond just teaching a curriculum. They've looked at the child holistically. They've looked at the child certainly scholastically from an educational perspective, but they looked at the child as a whole person. How do we come along the child who's hungry? How do we come around a child who don't have the resources to do well in school? How do we come around a child who doesn't have the emotional, psychological support at home? How do we come around those children? And they have invested in infrastructure in the school. They have invested in learning support. And every child at Western Primary is now proud to be a Western Primary learner, because the school had now developed this sense of identity. The other school that I have always had tremendous admiration for, Spine Road High. Spine Road High is in Rocklands, Mitchell's Plain. Now I remember in the mid to late 80s, this school was a very difficult school. We had a school had a bad name, bad reputation, and then a principal came to the school. And that principal had a vision for the school. He turned the school around, and the school has consistently reached 100% pass rate for matric over the last 10, 15 years. He is a hardworking leader. He leads by example. He had shown that the circumstances that the kids live in doesn't define who they are or who they become. And over a 40-year period, they've become the top-rated school in the Metro South district of the Western Cape. So a wonderful performance. And similarly, Mondale High, they've reached a matric rate of 99.2% last year, the matric results. And the school consistently invests in learners. There's a culture in the school where people feel that this is a place where I can excel. The environment at home might be difficult, the environment in my community might be difficult, but this is a place where I can excel. And so here we have these examples of how the profound impact of a leader on the culture and the life of a school. I take huge encouragement from that. I'll be working with the schools in the future, because if you interview these principals, they say, yes, we have a job to do, but people remains a priority. Okay, I need to invest in my teachers, I need to invest in my learners, and I need to invest in the community at large. And so even though we have very difficult circumstances on the Cape Flats in certain areas, through strong, courageous leadership, we are able to see different results. We'll talk a little bit about vulnerability as a leader. Okay? How important is vulnerability in a leader, and how does he demonstrate empathy and a sense of humanity towards his teachers and his school community? Now, I believe, and I've seen this in my teaching career with the leaders that I worked under, great leaders understand that there's a task at hand. There's work to be done. However, they have the emotional intelligence to understand and to recognize the human element of the team members, which is very important. Okay, I've also worked in environments where principals or leaders do not understand that. They do not understand the human element. It's just we have a job to do, and I'm indifferent to any other difficulty you may experience as a person. The results there is typically disastrous. But I've seen in my research and in my own personal experience in the workplace, those leaders who show that I'm not only interested in project achievement, I'm also concerned about the person and what type of people I actually play a role in developing. They come alongside their team members, and what I found is they ask very probing, pertinent, important questions of their team members. I'll give you some examples. In situations, and I've spoken with teachers who feel that their leader does not listen to them, but two great leaders, they would ask questions like, what are your struggles? What are you dealing with right now that is stifling your job performance? Okay, how can I support you through this? Which is very important. You need to show your team that there's a greater interest than meeting targets, but that you're concerned about the whole person. The great leader also asks, how can we turn this around? Because ultimately, if your team is in a good space, the entire community gains from that. A great leader will show empathy by asking, this is tough, but we will get through this, right? It's a difficult situation for you, I understand that, but we will get through this. And he also asks, or the great leader will also ask, let's look at some options. Now, the interesting thing about the way the questions are framed is the fact that the word we is always present in the questions that they ask. The great leader sees problem solving, going through difficulty with staff as a we project, not you deal with it and come back to me when you've overcome it yourself. So the great leaders, they really look at how do we resolve difficulties together as a team, and they also demonstrate a sense of vulnerability. Great leaders are authentic. They demonstrate vulnerability, and they are strong enough to acknowledge where they have weaknesses or limitations. And I always use the example of Steve Jobs. Now, Steve Jobs, the founder of Apple, the big company, would go into a meeting room with people who are more skilled than him in certain areas. He said, I cannot go in a meeting with people who know less than me about certain things. And so Steve Jobs would go into that meeting knowing that the people in that discussion will know more about certain things than he does, because ultimately it leads to a better product. And so that is once again a demonstration of the kind of leadership, the courageous leadership that we need in our schools. Not a leader driven by ego, not a leader driven by self-interest or desire to steamroll his team. The great leaders that we've seen in schools like West End, Spine Road and Mondale, they listen and they respond with wisdom and insight and discernment for the betterment of the greater community. The other area that I believe is also quite important, particularly leadership in education, is when we talk about convictional leadership, leaders who lead with conviction, right? The principal, as the leader of the school community, plays a deciding factor in creating that culture in the school. It is without a doubt that the leader will set the tone, as it were, They will drive the process, and through their example, through their input, their genuine authenticity, and their investment in the team, we see positive results. But sadly, in my observations, I've seen there are still leaders who are holding on to archaic, obsolete leadership styles. And I think that may be one of the reasons many of the schools are struggling. If we go to schools where teacher morale is low, where there's discouragement and there's low results, you go back to the leader and you understand that the leader is unilateral in his decision making. The leader is autocratic. The leader has an old school style of I'm the leader, I'm the principal, and you will follow my instructions. There's an inability or a reluctance to change or accept the fact that we're living in an ever-changing world. Lukewarm and indecisive leadership always will have a emotional, physical, psychological toll on the rest of the team. Yet when you have a leader with conviction, a leader with a set of values that drive the rest of the team, with a mindset of this project, the situation is greater than me, those are the leaders who bring the best out in their teachers. I spoke about my first school, and I fondly think about that school, Observatory Junior School. My first teaching job, I had a principal who had a very a creative style of leadership. In fact, he would give you latitude and leeway to work as a teacher, okay? And because of his leadership style, people would go beyond the call of duty in that workspace. And for me, that was a great learning experience to see how a leader who is not suspicious of his team, a leader who is not autocratic, a leader who has a sense of I have all the answers, how such a leader can bring out the very, very best in his people. Because you feel I'm in an environment that is enabling, an environment that is enriching, but in an environment where my skills and my abilities are acknowledged and I can excel and just be the best that I can be in my profession. So true leaders are driven by conviction. They have a set of values, and the set of values that they are driven by resonate with the rest of the team. People, they can embrace the values that the leader espouses. They are willing to follow the leader because the leader had demonstrated that he is worthy of being trusted. And so we really, in education, particularly in Cape Town, South Africa, I guess at large, we need to have leadership that is driven by agility, ability to make rapid decisions in a short period of time in an ever-changing environment. And we need leaders who are able to allay the fears of followers in a time of turbulence and in a time of change. Some schools during COVID-19 here in the Cape did very well because leaders were able to think very quickly and meaningfully during a very strange time, and those schools were able to excel, even in some of the low socioeconomic communities. So in a VUCA world, in an uncertain world, a world of a lack of clarity, a world of complexity, we need leaders with collaborative skills who values participation of all team members. We need leaders who are willing to debate issues. But interestingly, we also need voices of dissent. People who disagree with you as a leader and who can come up with different perspectives and different opinions on certain matters. Again, the true great leader, they listen to these things, they weigh them up, and they are able to make informed decisions that benefit the entire community. And so there's certainly adversity, is certainly an opportunity for growth, and it's certainly an opportunity for leadership character to develop.
You've been listening to Canon Collins scholar activist Melvin Dirkse and his mission to strengthen mental health and leadership in South African schools. Thanks for tuning in. Bye-bye.